Okay, good afternoon. As Kruna said, now I will do two different presentations. The first of them will be related to the interaction of grapevine grapevine crop modeling, and then the second one continuing with what Christophe at the beginning and Daniel now. It will be a second presentation about phenology modeling, especially for bud break. Okay, in this case, we should do a question is what is a crop model. In this case, the basis of a crop modeling is to explain a system, and which is a system for us. The system could be the interaction between or an environment in which the plant is included, but could be also a part of this plant. For example, the phenology, as we saw before, but also some other more focused scale, like, for example, the leaf development, or also the biochemical characteristics or respiration exchange between the plant and the atmosphere. In this case, the exact definition of a system generally is the limited portion of the reality that contains related elements, okay, from one to the other, and in this case, the definition was established in 1982. In our case, a crop model is a simplification of this system. Okay, in this case, this picture comes from the MONTEVITIS white paper published 2 years ago, in which we can see the interaction between the plant, the atmosphere, the radiation, and also the nutrients and water content in the soil. Then, the goals of grapevine modeling in this case is mainly to simulate the plant, okay? Interactions between the plant, climate, and the management, because not also the environment is included in this, but also the human management, it's important. As we saw, models are accepted as useful tools, not only for researchers, but also for the different farmers or other policymakers or agronomists that are related to, in this case, grapevine, but it's not specific for grapevine. The crop modeling is used in many cereals or other plants, also forest and like this. Okay, here we have a general overview of what a model. Okay, there are different model types in this case. In our case, we're interested in the mathematical ones, okay, that are numeric models, and they are more or less represented as process-based models, as representation of processes that could be empirical or process-based. Then they have also some temporal representation or uncertainty representation. In the case of the empirical models, the first one, I don't know, I think you can say better than me. The empirical models obtains the knowledge basically on the expertise. It's not related to a biological phase of the plant, but it's more the relation between, I don't know, one component or one behavior with some specific components in the plant. In this case, for example, if we use remote sensing data that can come from satellites or drones, with the production of the grape, we can establish a relation between both of them, the yield and, for example, derived vegetation index from the remote sensing data, and we can obtain the difference inside the vineyard, in this case about yield. Okay, so we have areas in which the yield will be lower than the others that are in here. Okay, this is also important for how the management will be improved or can be improved in this area. In this case, here we have a typical empirical model that is a linear regression. Then the second one is a process-based model that are most of the models that we use, especially sticks, or for example, unified APML, that is this one, are based. In this case, this model is characterized by the process inside the interaction or the plant. For example, here we have a block or a group of parameters that are related to the phenology. Another one to the leaf growth, the biomass partitioning, okay, and so on. Every time we are connecting the different processes, one after the other or parallelly from one to the other. Okay, the main characteristics of both models are described here in advantages and pros and cons of the models. For example, the empirical models describe the behavior of the plant or the relation in a simplest way, depending on if we use these classical models, or for example, as Daniel told before, if we use this artificial intelligence, in which we will increase also the computing, memory, and so on. Usually, it does not do not require heavy data processing, especially if we not work with artificial intelligence. And for example, the disadvantages is because they use equations that do not have biological meaning, and they have little confidence in relation to the others. On the contrary, the process-based models are, on the contrary, usually the parameters have a biological meaning, and the influence of the parameters on the whole crop can be isolated. Okay, so if we want to, for example, change the scion or the rootstock in a variety, we can directly modify the parameters that are from the roots or the aerial part, and we can also simulate the model. And then, for example, it needs, as a disadvantage, it needs a lot of assumptions that are not necessary in the empirical models. Okay, considering also the other two subdivisions, we have static models that do not contain time as independent variable. That could be, for example, I don't know, the intercepted solar radiation in a specific day. Or also we have the dynamic models in which, for example, we have the trend of a soil water content within the soil or also in the plant. So there are two different aspects that can be done. Also, we have against the prediction that could be deterministic or stochastic. And here, clearly, you know more than me in the aspect. Okay, so considering the modeling steps, what is the best for considering one model to the other like this? Okay, it depends a lot on the goal interest of the modeler. In this case, if we want to specify or to characterize all the plant growth, or only some characteristics like the yield, the soil water content, or the management of some characteristic, or the pruning or something like this. And also, when we talk about the models, it depends on the modeler, because if I want to use my model, usually I will work with it. but if I want to do something easier, at least I would prefer another one. But also we should have under consideration the initialization of the model, the calibration and validation processes, and in some cases also the sensitivity analysis of the model. In this case, for example, I put here some different models. For example, with linear models, we can do a relationship between the yield and the vegetation indices, as we saw in the previous slide. We can use also a logarithmic model considering the lie and then DVI, because the lie, then DVI has an asymptotic, more or less, trend with the lie, and then, for example, a Bayesian model for the characterizing the fruit growth. For example, in the case of process-based models, I put some of them. For phenology, for example, we have the PMP, the French software. For crop development, we have sticks, crop seeds, or other models that are general, that have the parameterizations also for grapevine, or more specifics to grapevine, like the Unified Grape ML or Gene Crop or some others. Okay, if we consider the different steps for modeling, we need some data that it's necessary. In this case, I will focus mainly on the process-based models. For location data, we understand that we need not also the position of the vineyard, because, for example, in some cases, the latitude is important for predicting or for knowing the trend of the radiation, but also the weather data. Okay, the weather is mainly has a important relation with the location. Also, we need some soil data, that can be the texture or the soil organic carbon content, the rock matter, and so on, the depth, soil depth. We need also some crop data that is more related between, for example, in the days that happen between one phase and the other, or how much biomass is biomass fraction that moves from the plant to the fruit, and so on. And also we need some data related to management. Not only the management that we can see, for example, pruning, tilling, or so on. Also the training system or the distances between the different plants. Oh, sorry. Then, for model calibration, you will know better than me because you are mathematicians. The calibration procedure is to adapt the parameters for describing the morphological and physiological characteristics of a vineyard, in general, of a plant, or so on. Usually, the crop parameters that we use for calibrating it, sometimes they come from the expertise or the literature, because other authors can experimented it before, can be measured, okay, on the field, and can be estimated. And then it depends on what we prefer. At the end, we will have a range of calibration that usually then we use in the optimization system. Then for model then we have the model validation, in which we test the procedure done in the calibration moment and comparing an independent data set or comparing the estimates with another independent data set. In this case, you know that there are a lot of validation techniques that could be for experts or related to expertise of the people, could be also related to the visual techniques, like for example, how far are the points from the 1-1 line, or other numerical techniques like deviances, R-square, root mean square error, and so on. In this case, for example, I show here a study published by the University of Trás-os-Montes in Portugal, in which they compare the calibration of the flowering into different sites and different statistics. And then here, for example, we have the yield residuals in a study of 3 years ago, in which we can see that the residuals don't have or don't seem to have any abnormal trend. Then we have the model sensitivity or the parameter sensitivity, in which we test the response of the parameters of the model to changes in changing all the parameters or some characteristics that influence the model. For example, here we have a sensitivity analysis of the parameters done in Leolini et al. 2018, in which they looked how much the parameters change or how much sensible is the parameter on the response of the model. In this case, they used two different procedures, hierarchical, I think, procedure, and an hypercube test and a Sobol test. And then here, for example, we have the sensitivity of the model on changing some parameters that in this case are the precipitation and the temperature. In this case, sorry for this because this is the only example I found, but the crop was olive trees and not vineyards, but it was published 4 years ago, also in the group of the University of Florence, and we can see here how sensible is the model of this change from these changes. And then when the model is calibrated and validated, we can apply it. As Christina and Daniel said, we should consider the goal of the application, and then we can apply or we can estimate how the plant can respond to some changes. For example, changes on management, changing the harvest time, or if we manage the grass, or if we fertilize or so on, some others. Also changes in the climate, for example, considering the climate projections, or if we change the location of the plant, considering that, for example, due to the climate change, plants now are going more stressed than some years ago, and also it links to the last point I put here, the varietal change. Okay, if I cannot put the variety here because it's stressed, which is the best variety to substitute the other one? And then I put here two different examples of model application. In this case, it's a seasonal forecast model in which we have here the observed weather from, I don't know, the beginning of the season until today, and then we estimate what will happen in future. We have, as Christoph said yesterday, we have some Copernicus seasonal forecasts for the next months. We can apply them and we can simulate which will be the yield in the next months. If we need, for example, to irrigate or fertilize or something like this to improve the yield, or to prevent or to don't permit the plant to be stressed as could be. And then the other model application I show you was published last year. It's Leolini et al. 2022, in which Okay, we know that if we use a crop model, in this case a unified ML, we will obtain for one vineyard, because usually we have only one point or only one result for the vineyard, of different characteristics, okay, that could be the phenology, the leaf area index, the biomass, and so on. Okay, but we can use another data that comes from remote sensing that, as we saw before, it permits also to simulate the characteristics of the plant in that moment, and we can create this relationship between, for example, the NDVI, the vegetation index, with the canopy cover in this case, for obtaining another relationship that permits to substitute the leaf area index that we simulated with the crop, and then here we will not have the simulation of a single point in the vineyard, we will have many points inside the vineyard, because for example, in this case, the sentinel image is for 10 meters, and we have the variability in the vineyard that it's not that not results if we consider only the model, because usually when we apply or calibrate the model, usually we have only one data of the texture of the soil, one data of the weather station, one data for management, and so on. But we know that the variability inside exists. The water is not always regular for all the vineyard, and this permits the consideration of the remote sensing data permits also to more or less see the variability inside the vineyard. Okay, so I gave a little bit presentation, a brief presentation of the crop modeling. Now I will show you how we calibrated and estimated the bad break in Europe. This is a paper we submitted 1 week or 2 weeks ago to the Climatic Research Journal. Okay, as Christina said before, the phenology, in this case the bad break, is highly influenced by temperature. In this case, for example, I put here an example in which usually bad break occurs in the middle of March in the northern part of Italy, in Veneto in this case. But during warmer winters, it can advance for 2-3 weeks or also more, or can delay if the temperature is colder than the usual one. Okay, here we considered the models in which here usually the bad break can be separated into different periods. Both of them are related to the dormancy phase. That is the phase that occurs between the leaf falls during winter, and then the buds occurrence in spring. There are two different phases. The first of them is the endodormancy, that is a rest period, and this is related to the internal characteristics of the plant. And then we have another one, this is the ecodormancy, that is a quiescence period in which the plant is affected, or the growth of the buds are affected by the external conditions, in this case the temperature. Okay, so we relate usually the first part to the cold temperatures and the second one to the warm temperatures. And this is the differentiation of the two main models for estimating bad break. In this case, the chilling forcing models have two different phases, in which the chilling phase is for the endodormancy period and the forcing phase is for the ecodormancy period. Usually these models can explain both, okay? And usually the models start not at all, but usually start at the end or at the beginning of August or something like this. Because as they said before, usually the models should start in a regular day and not others. Then there are the other ones that are the forcing models, in which the chilling phase is considered as reached, and we start simulating or calibrating the second one. In this case, usually the models start in January, February, depending on the latitude of the vineyard or the location we are. Okay, in this case, this is the first part of the presentation, in which in 2020 we calibrated and validated 8 different models for simulating or for doing an intercomparison of the different models that we have. Okay, we did it in the Clean for Vitis project, and we simulated in many places in Europe. Okay, here these are the models. These are the forcing models we used. We used 6 different models, in which 3 are forcing models that were introduced more or less by Christophe previously. The GDD, it considers the degree days. It has more or less this equation from a point in which the temperature base limits the accumulation of the forcing units, and has more or less this trend as Christophe showed before. And we have another 2. The uniform model is a sigmoid model that have these characteristics, in which we have 2 different parameters, one of them linked to the shadow of the curve, and the other one related to the starting point, more or less. And then we have another one that is the one model that the accumulation follows this trend, this parabolic trend. Then we have another 3 models that are chilling forcing models, that are named Breen, Unichill, and Unified. And as I told before, they have 2 models inside, that in this case is the BW model for the Breen, that is a chilling model, and the Richardson, it's a forcing one, that it's more or less a GDD model with the threshold, the upper threshold, and then the twin, and with the uniform, the sigmoid one, and then the last one is more or less the Unichill model, but parallelly to the accumulation of the forcing model, it has also an exponential model that influences the accumulation of the chilling model. And when they arrive to the chilling threshold, it's when more or less the bad break is estimated. Okay, for this study we used the data of three different countries: Portugal, France, and Luxembourg. And then, as you can see here, we used many locations for the fitting and validation, and then we did also the application. So we did like a double validation of the data. In the first case, we did the validation with the data we have at the beginning. Considering that some years are for calibration and some others for validation, and the application was done directly from different locations. And this validation and this fitting was done for 8 different varieties that are the most usual or are usual in all Europe. We have Chardonnay, Cabernet Sauvignon, Gewürztraminer, Grenache, Pinot Gris, Riesling, and Tuturiga from Portugal. In this case, okay, what we did. The workflow of the calibration procedure was, first of all, we removed the outliers of the data. So here we did a first calibration, and the data that was outside the interquartile of the residuals was removed. Okay, you can see here for the different varieties how many values were removed. Then, with the remnant or with the data that remained, we did 10 different subsamples of the data, considering the 30% for validation, 70% for calibration. And then we did both fitting validation and application for the others location. For this, we fixed the initial the starting point of the different models, in which for the forcing models it was fixed in the 1st of January or the 1st of March, and for the others the chilling forcing was fixed in the 1st of September or the 1st of August. Then additionally we fixed that the lowest and upper temperature for the one model were took from the literature and were fixed to 0 and 45. And then we used this literature, these studies, for estimating them or for calibrating the parameters. Okay, we used the PMP software that is from INRAE in France, in which we should put the weather data, the phenology data, because we need the observation of the phenology that in this case were provided by the PIK that were compiled, as Christophe explained before. And then we needed not only the phenology data, because the phenology data considered all the database, but the fitted data, the selected samples that were included for calibration. And then once put this one, and then we have another menu that considers directly the model, and then appear the sequence of the models, and we can change inside these icons. Clicking on these icons, we can fix, in this case, the parameters, or we can say, okay, calibrate it because I want to calibrate them. And then these are more or less the results when they are put on an Excel file. In this case, because we did 10 different calibrations, we have here 10 different, this is a subsample, but we have 10 different columns with all the values of the parameters for all the models. Okay, and then the errors they committed in any case. Okay, here in this case we used 4 different statistics that you will know better than me. And then if we look at the results, here we have this histogram composition of the different models for the different varieties. But going to summarize the data, we have that usually the fitting data was better for the chilling forcing models than the forcing models, as And as we can imagine, the fitting was always better than the validation data. Okay, here in this graphic, you have the different statistics, the efficiency, the R-square, root mean square error, and so on. Usually the ones with the lowest efficiency were located in the southern part, affected by temperature, as Daniel showed you before. And then here we have some results of the parameterization. We did it 2 times. And we selected the best model, but we selected also the model with the average parameterization, considering the best 8 parameterizations, single parameterizations that we saw before. In this case, for example, I show you also the graphics of the different varieties for GDD, in this case a forcing model and a chilling forcing model. Okay, more or less is what we had numerically before, and also the statistics of both models. Then, okay, this is the study was submitted 2 weeks ago. It's okay, we have the model calibrated, the models calibrated, but usually people predicts the future or predicts the phenology in future, averaging more or less the results. But we don't want to directly predict the future because it has been done many times. But we want here to estimate which is the source with the highest uncertainty on calculating the bad breaking future. Okay, this is more or less a summary of this. Many studies have been focused on studying the bad breaking future. For example, we have one here from Leolin et al. 2018, in which in future we simulated for multiple RCPs only and using only one single regional climate model and one phenological model. And another case could be using multiple regional climate models, but only one single phenological model, as Elder did in 2016. There is another one that could be they use only one single future climate model, but considering multiple phenological models, like Phil et al. In 2014. Okay, but we didn't find any study that mixed the three of them. Okay, so in our case, this is the objective of our study, is to evaluate uncertainty on simulating the phenological stage in future, considering the three sources of uncertainty. In this case, the phenological model, the regional climate models, or the RCP scenarios. In this case, as I showed you before, we have here the workflow in which we collected the data that comes mainly from the study published and the climate data from the PIK. Then we estimated bad break on more or less 56,000 points in Europe for 60 different climate scenarios. And then we calculated with an ANOVA the uncertainty, and then we classified we zonified the different sources of uncertainty. Okay, then here we have that, as we know, as we saw, the variability exists. for all the varieties, not only between the varieties, but also spatially in Europe. And then we saw also that this variability is becoming from the different sources. In this case, are individual relationships between each source and the variability, between the RCM, the RCP, or the phenological model, and we see that the trends of the different, or the frequencies of the different occurrences are vary from one source to another. So we did the ANOVA, and then we more or less averaged them for all Europe. We here see the percentage of variability of each of the sources, and we can see that the main one comes from the phenological model in all Europe, and the second one is from the climate models, the regional climate models. But this is for only for the variables that we entered. But as you can see, most of the uncertainty was not being explained by the three sources we put. So it could be another source, or the interaction of different sources could be studied, and but we didn't study that. Okay, and then considering the variability around Europe of the different sources, we zonified, or we calculated which were the best clusters for classifying the uncertainty in Europe. And for example, we did it for all the models together, but as we saw that the differences between the models exist, we also calculated if inside each of the models there were some differences. And we can see that also inside the models there are other differences. But here, for example, considering all the phenological models, the most quantity of differences are in the Iberian Peninsula and southern part. Considering only the phenological model, the forcing models, or the chilling forcing models, these differences changed because, for example, the highest ones for the forcing models were in the eastern part, while in the chilling forcing models were in the western parts. This is because, or we suppose that it's because the temperature affects differently for the chilling and the forcing accumulations, in which high warm temperatures in the chilling phase, in the chilling accumulation units, delays the accumulation of the chilling units, and then the forcing units start later than, for example, here for the forcing units that were fixed in the 1st of January. On the contrary, with the cold ones. And then, as we told before, here we have the influence of the temperature in the different models. We can see that the forcing models have more or less the same trend, in which we have this cone. And then, considering the chilling forcing models, the temperature, it's not always equal, because cold or warm temperatures affect differently one model or the other, and also the different varieties. Okay, we have here this V or double V shape for the chilling forcing models, when here is always decreasing. Okay, and that was all. I tried to be brief. To do a brief presentation. I don't know if you have questions.
Good evening to all. My name is Elder Fraga. I come from Portugal, from UTAD. I would like to thank the previous presenters because they made my job now much easier because they already talked about the impacts of climate change, how climate is going, how we collect the data, how we use the data in the crop models, and how we project the impacts of climate change. This is work that we have been doing at Utah a long time, since a long time, even before Clean for Vitis. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about how climate can impact grapevine productivity and other factors in the European area. Well, most of you probably know this map. This map shows the main producing wine regions in the world. And if we take a close look at the main producing regions, we can see that they are scattered a little bit around the world, but they are also in very niche places. You can see that in the northern hemisphere, they are located mostly in Europe, also now in China and other regions. But if we look closely, you'll see that they are in specific latitudinal regions that we are going to discuss a little bit why. The vineyard area around the world is 7 million hectares, and the wine production was in 2017 around 275 million hectoliters. This is also a very well-known chart. It shows the three main factors that influence wine quality and productivity, and from this we can see that there are three very important factors. One is soil characteristics, like soil depth, soil texture, water, nutrient supply. The other is climate, of course, radiation, temperature, rain, humidity, wind speed, etc. And the other factor, of course, the decisions of the wine growers, the cultural practices, what varieties they decided to plant, how they decided to plant them. Of course, all these three factors are known in several regions as the terroir. These are the three main components. Of course, terroir also includes other factors, but these three are very important. From these three, there are usually two that are fixed. From one year to the other, the soil doesn't change. The cultural decisions also from one year to the other don't tend to change, but the weather can be significantly different from one year to the other, particularly in the later years and in the last decades. So taking another look at the map, we can see why these regions, why viticulture is in these places, and they tend to be in regions with temperatures between 12 and 22 degrees, both in the northern and in the southern hemisphere. So this takes us here. So because climate change is changing this traditional relationship between the vineyards and the climate, and we need to explore what is going on. If we take a look at this picture, it shows us already what you have seen, the phenological stages, the growth stages of the vine, and there's one very important factor too, which is all my predecessors already talked, which is temperatures. And temperature usually above 10 degrees in the beginning of the season is what makes the vineyard grow. Another factor is wine quality. We also know that temperatures affect the quality of wine. If we have a climate that is too cold, the sugar will go down, the aroma will be harmed, there will be usually an unbalanced wine. Also, if the temperatures are too hot, we will have a high alcoholic content. This will harm also the wine. Usually there are some optimum temperatures and optimum climatic conditions to develop good wines. Of course, this is not a rigid definition. That's why I have that arc there. There are some regions and some varieties that prefer cooler weather, and there are other varieties that can be planted in a more warm weather. This leads us here to these scenarios that were developed some time ago. We are now waiting for the new scenarios. So these scenarios show that there will be an average increase around the globe from 1 to 4 degrees, depending on if the scenario is moderate or if the scenario is more severe. So that is what we try to use to predict what is going to happen to those vineyards, to the vineyards in Europe. So the first studies that we did a long time ago is, let's see what's going to happen to temperatures during the growth stage from April to October. And if we use different climate models, this is a simulation using about 10 to 12 climate models, and the above maps are from the recent past, the maps in the middle are for the future, and these maps here are the differences. And the differences show that temperatures are obviously increasing, particularly in southern Europe, and precipitation is decreasing also in southern Europe. If we take a look at the Hagelin index, this is an index that is very important for wine growers. Almost all wine growers know this index. It has been used a long time ago. And if you calculate this index for the past and for the future, we'll also see very clear trends of the increase of temperature that can have a lot of impact on the vineyards, on the grapevines, particularly some of the impacts that Sergi mentioned and some of the things that we model here. Also, other indexes applied to viticulture. One is the dryness index, that's also very known around wine growers, and you can see that this index shows that particularly in some regions in the southern European area there will be a very strong increase in the drought, and this may affect the vineyards grown here. And another index that has some relationship to pests and diseases, in this case mildew, shows that while the mildew relationship is not clear, but since there is a decrease in precipitation, less humidity will actually be beneficial for some areas. If we take a look again at these regions, we know one thing for sure, that if temperatures are increasing, there will be a clear northward shift of these temperatures in the future, of course in the northern hemisphere, and the opposite in the southern hemisphere, a southern shift of these ranges. So we applied what Sergi was introducing in the last presentation, process-based modeling. And process-based modeling is not the same as a statistical model, a simple statistical model that just uses data from the past. No, these models tend to explain, they try to explain every biological process that happens in the plants, the relationship between the plants and the soil, the relationship between the plants and the climate. Everything is tried to be explained inside this model in a manner that can be understood by us. So The process is in 5 steps. We usually collect data. So in this case, we collect soil data for any typical region. In this case, this is a region in Portugal. After the soil data, we collect the climate data. The climate data usually comes in these big grid cells that you see here, these big boxes, and we apply usually transformations that relate to the statistical transformation that is called downscaling, that we usually can perform and obtain a better resolution from our climatic data. This is very important. Imagine if we have a vineyard that is in a specific box. Obviously, every vineyard will be impacted the same. So we apply this downscaling, which is very important. Also, we get other indicators from farmers, such as the variety that is grown and how it is grown there, the training system and other important characteristics of the vineyards. And then we run the model. And then we run the model spatially, not just for one point, but we run the model for every point inside this region, and we obtain the results, such as the potential yields of those vineyards in the area. So in this study case that we have here, this was done a long time ago, but we did this using several models for Europe, for all of Europe. And we obtain results such as phenology, but also leaf area index, harvest date, nitrogen stress, and more importantly for the farmers, the yield differences. So, for example, one of our results regarding the flowering date, as you can see, all the models pointed in the same result, that if we are going to have higher temperatures, that means that the plant usually achieves the phenological stages earlier. So we have usually earlier phenological stages are projected for the future. Regarding water stress, the model also predicted higher water stress, particularly in southern European wine areas. For nitrogen, the model was a bit mixed. We have a lower stress, particularly in inner Iberian Peninsula, and a higher nitrogen stress in other areas. We believe at the time that this was about the infiltration, related to questions about infiltration and runoff. And obviously we also have yield, and as you can see in this graph that shows that the lower yield are in red values and the higher yield in blue values, that we have projected for southern European regions a lower yield, whereas we potentially explain new suitable growing regions in Northern Europe. And if we take a look at this map, for example, of the Great Britain, we can see that in 1980 to 2005, no suitable region was projected here, but we know now that there are many viticultural areas that are being planted in southern Great Britain. And this was also projected by our models. So, regarding the main results of this study, we projected for southern Europe lower yields, which are derived from higher water and heat stress. Extreme heat may also threaten the quality of wine, and we also project that since the phenological stages will be affected, leading to possible earlier phenological stages, a rescheduling must be taken into account. Regarding regions in Central and Northern Europe, we project an expansion of the regions, higher yields there, and increased quality of their wines. Of course, we also work on the adaptation measures. We don't just provide what is going to happen, we also attempt to provide some guidelines on how the growers may adapt to this potential changes. Well, we did also a couple of studies, but focusing more on irrigation and mulching. This is also a modeling study, and what you see here in this map on the left is the projection for yields for the future in Portugal. And you can see by these red areas, which is a decrease in yield. So particularly in the inner areas, which are more dry, there is a severe decrease in yield, if non-irrigated, of course. If we apply irrigation, which is this middle map, irrigation, which is a smart irrigation, which is only the necessary irrigation for the plant to survive, we can see that we can mitigate this decrease in yields. Nonetheless, this map here on the right shows the amount of water that will be necessary, and the amount of water will be very high, which is probably an unsustainable practice in the future. Regarding mulching, mulching is basically applying a certain product on the soil to prevent so much evaporation of water. It can be several materials, even plastic or rocks. And through our study, we see that mulching is a viable climate change adaptation measure because it also mitigates the decrease in yield that is projected for the future. And of course, regarding other measures that may take longer time to be implemented, and in this case we studied varietal selection, and we had a data set about 40 varieties in Portugal, 40 of the main planted varieties in Portugal, which is combined with their location, so we know where they are planted. And we did a study if in the future these locations where they are planted will be the best possible locations for them, and obviously they will not be, because climate is changing. So we established 3 groups within these 40 varieties, and one group, which is the varieties that require less heat, will tend to shift towards, basically all of the varieties will tend to shift to cooler regions. Nonetheless, some will shift more than others. This is the differences between the maps. So this was the research that was done some time ago. We hope that within this project we can update some of these results with also the new regional climate models that we have been waiting for. I leave you just with one picture of the Douro Valley. The Douro Valley is a very beautiful place, and I hope that you have this experience to visit it in the future. Thank you very much. I'm open to questions.